Hello everyone, welcome back. My name's Colton and this is a new Learn C# 12 tutorial, and we're going to be covering switch statements. Before we go any further, if you're new here, I'm creating a Learn C# tutorial series because I have an upcoming internship where I need to know C#, and I find the best way of learning is actually through teaching. So I'm going through C# 12 in a nutshell over on O'Reilly Media, going chapter by chapter, kind of explaining some of the concepts in that book and presenting some examples over here on YouTube. So hopefully both you and I get something out of it. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the motivation of switch statements. Let's say that we're given some sort of number that we have to make a decision upon. So first we're going to have an int num and we're going to set it equal to 5. But let's say earlier on in the program, we actually don't know what this number is set to, but eventually we're going to make a decision off of it. So without switch statements though, we have to use if statements. So we can say if num is equal to 1 and then have the set of open braces. Next we can say else if num is equal to 2, again have the set of braces, and we can keep going and going with this. We can have another else if statement saying num is equal to 3 possibly. After we've iterated through all our domain that we expect, if we still don't get any of those numbers, we can finally just say else I want to perform such and such operation. And this is a bit verbose. As you can see, we have to say if and then give some sort of condition, but we're always switching off of one condition though. So we can actually condense this using switch statements. So let's get right into how to write a switch statement. Let's take what we have here and turn it into a switch. So the syntax of a switch goes as such. We say switch off of the constant that we have, and if we're working with a constant, it has to be a boolean, a character, an enum, or a string. There may be some other constants that we can switch off, but these are the main ones that we'll switch from. So we have to give it some sort of variable that we're going to be checking over, basically the domain that we're looking at. So we're going to switch off of num, and then you open up the braces here. Now switches take multiple cases, and a case is just an instance of an if statement or some sort of condition. So in order to map this if num is equal to 1, here all we have to say is case 1, and that's all we have to do. That's basically saying any of the logic that goes below me is going to be how I handle 1. So right here I can go ahead and do a write line and say we're going to do 1, or just print it out to the screen, and then break. If we don't put a break, we're going to continuously fall through into other cases, and I'll show you how that works here soon. If we want to continue this logic that we have down in our if statement, we just create another case. So we can say case 2, and then we can go ahead and write line and print out 2 to the screen. Make sure you break, because otherwise we'll continue to fall through. And if it's neither 1 or it's 2, we can have another case saying it's equal to 3, or we can go ahead and do what is a default case. So all we have to write is default, open it up with the colon, and then do a write line and say greater than 2. We don't know what it is, but it's something that's, well, actually it could not be greater than 2. It could just be something that's not 1 or 2. But let's go ahead and just say it's greater than 2 in this instance. Let's close that off, go ahead and do a break, and there we go. Now let's go ahead and run this program and make sure that everything is running correctly. And we should see that we don't hit case 1, we're not in case 2, and we're going to hit the default because 5 is neither of those numbers. So let's run this, and there we go, we get greater than 2. Let's go ahead and change our num equal to 1 and make sure 1 is getting printed out to the screen, which it does. So we're in good hands here. But what if I was passed some kind of variable that could be of multiple types, or we want to be able to switch off of a variable that can be a string or an int or a bool? Let's go ahead and talk about that next. Now, we don't always have to switch off of constants, so numbers, strings, bools, stuff like that. We can actually switch off of types, or like reference types, really. And so let's go ahead and demonstrate this with an example. I'm going to have an int I again. We're going to set it equal to 1. It doesn't really matter what we set I equal to, because in this function that we're going to write, we just want to print the type that it is. So if I write a void function, it's not going to return anything. We're just going to call it print type. And in here, we're going to take in an object that's named O, and let's go ahead and open up the braces, and all we're going to do is just print the type that were passed in from the parameters. Now this example is ripped straight from the book. I want to go ahead and give them credit about this because this is actually a pretty clever way of demonstrating how we can switch off of types. And so what we can do here is just say switch, and we can switch off of O just like how we were doing before, but instead in our case we can go ahead and just technically cast this to some sort of type. So we can say, if O is an integer, we can just say case int I, and then we can go ahead and write line like we were earlier, and we can just say a write line int, and then make sure you break because otherwise you're going to fall through. And then we can do another case saying string s, and we can then go ahead and do a write line that says string, and then we can go ahead and do a colon, and I don't know, why not go ahead and just print out the value of it right here. And so we can just pass in s, and the dollar sign actually has to go outside of this, and again, make sure you break. And so we can go ahead and actually pass in the types that we think that O could be. And so let's go ahead and let's run this, making sure that it works, which it's not going to work because we never called the method. So let's go ahead and call it right here. So print type, give it I, let's see what's printed, and we get int. Okay, awesome. Now there could be an issue with this. What if we were to make this a double? So we're going to enter the switch statement. We're going to say, okay, is this a case int I? No. Is it a string? No. And we don't have a default case. So let's find out what happens. Nothing. We just kind of skip over the switch statement and we're perfectly fine. Don't worry about any exceptions thrown. We will get an exception being thrown when we go into switch expressions. A really cool thing that C# allows us to do is called switch expressions, and these let us assign values to a variable using a switch statement in kind of a really condensed way. And so let's go ahead and take the real slow approach, or the more verbose approach, and let's say that we had an int num, which is equal to, let's just go with 1 for now, and we had a string called numster, and it's supposed to represent the value that num is, but just in like a string form. So this should technically be equivalent to ONE1. So just using if statements, we can say if num is equal to 1, we just open up the braces here and we say numster is going to be equal to the string 1. And we can continue this by saying else if, I could type today, if num is equal to 2, then numster is going to be equal to the word 2. And again, we can go ahead and do an else and just say something else. Numster is equal to, I don't know what it could be. And so let's go ahead and do a write line down here to make sure that is getting assigned properly. So we're just going to print out numster here, and we get 1. But again, this was kind of a lot of code, just like, some indentation, all the braces opening, checking conditions can kind of be a little bit painful. Instead, let's take that out and replace this with a switch expression. So here we can say numster is equal to num switch, and then you open up the braces, and this is where we can assign numster by switching off of some kind of value that num can be. So let's go ahead and go through this. This is very similar to a switch statement where we can just go ahead and kind of have our cases, but except we don't really have to say case. So for our first quote unquote case, we can say 1, and then we do an equal sign and then a greater than symbol, and we would return whatever 1 is supposed to represent here. So 1 is equivalent, the number 1 is equivalent to the string 1. If we were to get a 2, we do an equal sign and a greater than symbol, and we would return the string 2. So we can now go ahead and take out this if statement, and we can see that since this is 1, we're going to return 1 in this little switch expression here. And so let's go ahead and take a look. We're still getting 1, and let's change this to a 2 just to make sure we get 2. But what if num was equal to 3? We go through this assignment, we check if it's 1, it's not 2 either, but there's no default case, and so we're looking for 3. 3's not there. We get a switch expression exception. This is what happens when we don't have a default case in our switch expressions. To avoid this from happening, we just have to do an underscore equals and greater than sign and just say, I don't know what it is. This acts just exactly as if it were a default statement. And so let's go ahead and run this one more time. We get an IDK. We don't know what that number is. And so that's really the basics of a switch expression. It kind of condenses that big long if else statement and all that stuff into kind of a more succinct, compact way. Again, these are kind of like our case statement saying this is case 1. If it is 1, then we're going to set it equal to this. If it's this case, then we're going to set equal to 2, so on and so forth. The last thing I want to show you is how fall throughs work, which allow us to define multiple cases for basically a single case and go-to case statements. So let's switch off this very bare bones example of that we have a number, it's set equal to, instead let's go ahead and set it equal to 1 in this case, and let's create a switch statement out of it. So again, we're just going to do a switch off of num, open up the braces, and now we're going to say if it's a 1 or it's a 2, then we can go ahead and do a right line and print 1 or 2, and then make sure we go ahead and do a break statement. So how this gets evaluated is that we enter the switch, we go through case 1, but there's nothing to do in case 1, and so we're going to actually just fall through down to case 2. And when we do a right line, it's going to say 1 or 2. Let's make sure that this works how it's intended. We get a 1 or a 2. That's really the basics of fall throughs in a switch statement. There's not much else to it. We can also define another one. We can do a case 0, and so 0 through 2 will end up in the 1 or 2, or like how our program is going to output it. And so again, just the basics, not much to it. What if we had a default though? And so if we go down here and we write a default, we can go to another case from one case, and we can do that by saying go to case 0. And so if we were to go to case 0, if we were to hit a default basically, which would be anything outside of 0, 1, or 2, we'd go up to 0 and we'd actually fall all the way back down to this right here. Let's just test that real quick. So again, we're at 1, we're going to fall through to 2, so run, we get 1 or 2. Now let's go ahead and make this a 10. We don't have a case for 10, so we're going to hit the default, going to go to case 0, which falls through all the way back here again. There we go, we get a 1 or a 2. Now let's make sure that it's not catching on this case or this case either, so we'll go ahead and define some behavior for 0, and we can do a right line, just throw in some random string here, go ahead and break, and we'll see that we're just going to get this random string printed out to us, because again, our default case took us up to case 0. Alright, that's it for the video. I hope you learned a little bit about how switch statements and expressions work over in C#, and I hope that you can go and apply this over in your own program. Again, thank you for watching, and if you learned something from this video, don't forget to like and maybe subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I'm going to continue putting out more C# videos because my internship is coming up here really soon, and so I gotta learn more of it. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.